Yay, we're recording.
Yeah, even talking. I like it.
Okay, Jeff, do the theme song. Okay, welcome to episode 2 of Small Talk. Today, we are going to be talking about Jeff's 12-tone piece, Ins Licht. How is the pronunciation?
That was very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So today we are also talking with Jim Winchell, and we performed this piece at Western. He was conducting it, and I was in the orchestra, so we thought Jim could bring some nice perspective to it. And we also want Jeff to explain himself. Why did he write a 12-tone piece?
Explain yourself, Jeff.
Yep.
We want to know how this came to be, because this 12-tone isn't really what you're known for.
No, and that's probably a good thing. I mean, I've told both of you this story already, but for anybody else that's hearing this, um, I don't like 12-tone music. 12-tone music to me is a math exercise. It's a logic puzzle. It's fun to do it on a piece of paper, and then you can see how everything lines up. It isn't that great. You can learn techniques and all the good stuff that you're supposed to learn as a composition student, but I don't ever want to hear it. Almost 40 years ago now, I guess. I was in university, uh, first year of composition lessons. I was going to one of my tutorials, and one of the pieces that we'd been given to write was supposed to be a 12-tone piece, which was brand new for pretty much all of us. Nobody ever experienced anything like this before. So I tried several times and just nothing was working. I had a tutorial in like 20 minutes. I was sitting in the cafeteria having lunch, and I came up with the tone row and wrote my entire piece in 20 minutes in the cafeteria. Went to my tutorial. We played through it, and in the context of the tutorial, my prof told me that I was the only one who grasped atonality and that he loved it. And I learned a lot that day. Some of them I don't want to repeat. Um, I know he meant it as a compliment. I'm not sure I've ever taken that as a compliment. Um, I was happy with the mark, put the piece away, and it didn't see the light of day again for decades. And then I think it was 2 years ago now, maybe. I had time. I was pulling out some of the older things that I had written, and I'm notorious for not throwing anything out that I've written. Came across this piece, and I thought, I wonder if it was really as bad as I thought it was. So I played it through on the piano once, and yes, it really was that bad, and I was ready to never look at it again. And then I kind of wondered, is there anything I can do with this so I can salvage it and make it something that I would want to listen to, regardless of whether anybody else would want to? So from there, I decided, you know what? In the tone rows, in any tone row, there's an implied harmonic framework. If like any two notes together or any three notes, there are passing tones, there are whatever, you might be able to build something around this 12-tone piece. So that was the challenge I gave myself. I was sure it wasn't going to work. It felt like unraveling a Rubik's Cube, 20 by 20 Rubik's Cube in my mind without touching it. Like it was probably one of the more challenging pieces that I've ever tried to write. And in the end, and I've told both of you this already, I think I broke music because it shouldn't have worked. I really like it. So somehow what I did, for me at least, made sense and made the piece something that I would want to listen to.
Now, I already know the answer to this, but can you back up a little bit and like when you first wrote that for your composition class, did it have a title? How did the title come to be?
No, It didn't really have a title because it was just a composition tutorial exercise, right? Um, when I started trying to convert it into something that I would want to listen to, I was calling it in English grossness because that's all I could think it was going to be. It was just gross and garbage and blech. And in German, I think it's either Grobheit or Grossheit. I'm not sure. And then when it was done, in Licht, which means in light or into light, right? And if you listen to the piece, I mean, there's lots of different layers to it. It's one that the piece was in on my shelf for years, and I finally pulled it out into the light. It almost sounds like a character who's hiding in shadows and is a little timid, a little afraid to come out. But by the end, there's this triumphant, I made it. And, there's different layers to it. But yeah, originally it was just grossness.
It's really
Thanks.
beautiful, Jeff. Thank you.
Mhm.
Jim, do you want to tell us why you programmed this piece? You can also tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So about myself, oh gosh, that's the hard part. So I'm originally from San Diego area in California, and did bachelor's of music education, and a minor in psychology, and then I was teaching high school for 9 years out in California, band, orchestra, you name it, all the things, and found myself wanting to go somewhere else and do my master's in conducting, and ended up at Western, where I met both of you. Uh, and so, as far as this piece, that's obviously the fast forward short version. But as far as this piece, we were hanging out at the music library, and I remember you were working on kind of cataloging a lot of Jeff's music. And Jeff, I think you were saying, "Oh, you got to listen to this one. I think I broke music," and I'm like, "Well, that's quite a claim."
I wasn't
And
wrong
so
though.
I think Ryan and you were like working on something or other, and I just pulled it up on the spot and started listening to it there in the library. Um, and I was like, this is actually pretty cool. I kind of like it's interesting. What is this? And so I was like, can I see the score? And you mentioned, well, I haven't really made the score like pretty yet. I haven't edited it. I'm like, that's fine. And so so you sent me over the score, and yeah, I took a look. I'm like, this is kind of cool. Like I mean, it starts off with that really sudden forzando tritone in the whole
Yeah.
pair of horns, right? I'm like, okay, this is I don't know, but as you said, that it just kind of creeps out of the shadows into this like glorious light every few phrases, and there's this like moment of triumphant resolution. And I just really liked how it was orchestrated and how like it evolved over the course of the time that it was going. And it's just like, this is something about this just kind of caught my ear, and I couldn't not program it if I had the opportunity. And so I was working on programming music for my conducting recital at the end of my master's degree. And I was like, hey, Jeff, can I play that piece? Can I program that piece? Is that okay? And he's like, yes. So,
With a very confused look on my face, like, why would you want to do that?
Are you
grossness,
sure?
right? And it was probably what was in your head. Um, but no, I definitely thought like this is such a great piece. It's different than anybody who's there will have heard before, and it's a cool way to feature a local composer and like work with the composer in real life. And also, I wanted to do something that was like orchestral in nature and involved a lot of strings and not just winds and percussion only, which is what I had mostly focused on for the rest of my masters. And so this ended up going on the recital, and the journey to get all the musicians together in one place at the same time was quite a challenge. I will say that, with all the different grad student schedules and faculty schedules and studio schedules and this and that. But we ended up having quite a decently sized orchestra, that all crammed onto that little stage, and we made it work, and it was really quite impressive. I was very happy with the result. Terrified, because I think that the dress rehearsal on the day of the recital was the first time that everybody had been there together at the same time.
Yeah.
Katie, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, like we had only had like one of the two flute players or one of the two oboists or something was up, or like we didn't have a horn this time, or we didn't have a second violin part this other time. I'm like, I kept cueing things that weren't there, and it was just messing with my mind. But in the end, it worked out. I do think that the dress rehearsal was actually our best performance of it
Yeah.
instead of the recital itself. So I was a bit bummed about that, but that's just the nature of live performance, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But it turned out really well overall, and I'm really proud of it, and I was really grateful to be able to work with Jeff and Katie and the whole orchestra that we put together, and it was a fun time.
Okay, so did you get feedback from any of the musicians in the process, and what were their thoughts on the piece?
Just kidding.
Katie was like, "What the?"
Yeah. Oh, I heard about that. I worked with Katie.
Well, I think the biggest feedback was well, I guess there's two things. When I first started working on it, I wanted it to go a little faster,
Yeah.
and then we brought Jeff in, and Jeff was like, "No," and so I took it slower, and I think it worked out. I may have been a couple clicks over his original tempo, but I think it was pretty close, and it definitely worked. So so yeah, I was happy to adjust since he was very confident that that's how he wanted it. And so that was one of the big things. And then the other one were there were some of the things in the string parts, as far as like where are they going to be free bowing, and should we be really emphasizing certain entrances or dynamics, like should we get softer here? How are we going to navigate the at measure 58, um, the violas come in on beat one by themselves, and then the violins come in on beat two, each at forte, but like just the viola section. Jeff, come on, no, I'm just kidding. But like they were like, really? And I'm like, yes, you got this. Let's
Yeah.
go. Play out violas. And they're like, oh, cool, okay.
Yeah.
And it worked, you know. But that's not a common thing for them, I suspect. So they weren't quite ready to be like playing by themselves on beat one, and nobody else on the strings was playing. And then the violins come in and they have to decrescendo all the way down to piano by the next measure, and then tremolo. Okay, how are we doing those tremolos, right? I also remember like the bass player kept looking up at me the first verse, like, is that right? Is that right? Because they have a lot of notes that are like a half step above what they think it should be. Like we're on some form of a D harmony, but they're playing an E flat. And I'm like, this is cool. Because it makes you think, wait, is that right? But when they really go for it confidently, like it's like, oh. And that kind of adds to the suspense and the character of the piece in such a cool way. Yeah, I think most of the things were with the strings though, as far as like, how do we want to do this? You know, like, are we going to do an up bow here? Are we going to do down bow here? Um, can we play the pizzicatos at 13 even softer? Creepy, boom, 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 boom. Like, such a cool little thing.
I remember coming into the one rehearsal,
Yeah.
and it was as much dealing with psychological mindsets as to here are your notes, right? And I remember a couple of the performers looking at me like, "Are you serious? We can do this?" And like, you can absolutely do this, you know? But you're right. I mean, there are things that certain instrument groups aren't always given, you know?
Mhm.
So entries like that for the violas are rarer than entries like that for a violin.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, sound wise, um, there's a certain sound that you want, and that entry is going to be different on a viola than it is on a violin. You
Absolutely.
know, so you have to play with what sounds you want as much as anything else. Those pizzicato sections you just mentioned are
Yeah, measure 13
excruciating.
or so.
They're excruciating because you played them, and then I counted it last night actually getting ready for this. There's 6 seconds between the first entry and then you wait, and then they repeat
Just
it, and you
silence.
wait, and it's 6 seconds of silence,
Yeah.
which in a piece of music is like infinity, you know?
Yeah.
And
Especially if
then
it's not like between movements, it's just in the middle of the piece. Yeah.
just in the middle of a piece, and then the third time it comes in, and the flutes are now a third above, so
Mhm.
it adds that extra little bit of tension and direction. But the first couple of times, like, and again, it I think emphasizes the timidness of a character coming into the light but not wanting to come into the light, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember being told years ago, a mark of a good composer, there's two things. One is how they handle dissonance, and the second thing is how they handle silence. Because
Mm,
because
I like that.
every every student, I think, who's ever taken composition, it's how do I fill up the silence?
Mhm.
You know, it's like everything is silent until I start. I have to make sure it doesn't go silent, and trying to figure out how to manage that and allow silence, but still make it meaningful. That
Mhm.
that's a challenge. You know, I don't think I've ever put 6 seconds of silence in anything before, honestly.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it makes me think of like since I've spent so many years of my life as a teacher in public schools, like you get to a certain point where you're comfortable just waiting
yeah.
for someone to respond and just like letting it be silent for the processing to happen in their head. So like I feel like it's kind of similar to what's happening here. It's like boom, 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 boom.
And
Oh, okay.
everybody's afraid to put their hand up at that point.
Yes.
I,
I'm also curious about like around measure 41, and Katie will remember there where I asked her and the other flute player to just kind of look at that because the flute part doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything else.
yeah,
Like
It was
what
scary.
was it? What was the inspiration behind that section, Jeff?
I know exactly what section you're talking about. The inspiration for that was I had locked myself in to following my original piano score note for note and making sure I wasn't changing things. And
Okay.
then when I got to that section where I had gone harmonically, didn't allow for those notes to really fit anywhere. So I had to figure out a way to somehow include them.
Uh-huh.
So I was still going note for note according to what's in the score, but also not making them front and center and just, like a sore thumb, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's what those were. Those were here's what everybody else in the orchestra is doing up to this point. And then there's this little line. It's only one measure, two measures, I think.
That goes on for a while. It's
It's like, oh yeah, it goes on for a
six
while.
measures. One, two,
Six
Yeah.
three,
measures.
four,
Maybe it's
five.
not
Sorry,
this
seven,
one, but
seven. Yeah, you got seven measures of that from 41 to 48, really. But it's just because it's spread out. Like there's a measure
well,
of a couple notes, then a measure of silence,
yeah.
a measure of a couple notes, measure of
Okay.
silence.
Is that almost like those little beep, beep, those
Yep.
little moments? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Those are, so that section is like a palindrome. Okay. So the first few measures, at least a palindrome in the original piano piece. Okay.
Okay.
They
Okay.
were, there were like those fake horn chords or whatever. Like
Hmm.
I think in this section I put them in the strings, and it's kind of these long
Yeah, it's in the strings and the
chords
oboes.
holding with that ostinato thing in the bass, right? And then the flute is kind of playing those little accent notes randomly, it sounds like.
Hmm.
Piano piece, up to the first two measures, it was in whatever rhythm, and then the last two measures, it was just a mirror image. So the chords, the rhythms, everything was a palindrome, which also I think helped me get the A plus in the piece because my teacher just lost his mind. When it came to
On
this,
paper, that's cool. Yeah.
well, when I came to this arrangement, I had really taken liberties with note durations and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, like the original piece, I think was 1.5 minutes on the piano, and this piece is close to seven, I think,
Yeah.
something
Six
like
or
that.
seven.
So I was really taking some liberties with speed and with note durations and whatnot. So when it came to the palindrome, it was like, I can't do that exactly. How am I going to do this now? And then that's what happened. I have to
Mm.
say, the first time I heard even a computer play those flute notes above everything else, I got so excited. Like it just in my head, it was like, this is so perfect, you know?
I mean, it's cool. I
I
like it.
just
It's
loved
just
it.
it
So
seems very random, but I remember like, oh, okay, that adds a little extra flavor to that spot
yeah,
when it's playing.
exactly.
Because
It's
that's
just
on top.
like,
You were mentioning the basses, like the bassoons and the bass. Yeah, the clarinets. Like that
yeah.
thing to one. Yeah. Anyway, I'm totally off pitch. My voice is. stop from being sick, but
That section also was kind of an accident. So
really,
those notes in the bottom instruments were in the original score. And then I was, they only happen once and then it moves on to something else. And I'm like,
hmm,
I need something to fit under what else is happening. So let's just see if I can repeat that gesture over and over and see what that does. Because now I've introduced the same tone roll, but in multiple settings. I was amazed that it worked out that well. And it's the creepiest section in the whole
it
thing.
is.
Like it
I
just,
love it.
there's just this eeriness about it, but it just fits, you know?
I feel like this section at 41 really capitalizes on the creepiness that you set up with the pizzicatos at 13, with all the
Yeah,
silence in between them. Like
yeah.
those two sections to me were like the parts that I'm like, oh, this is creepy. This is the dark, ooh, spooky part.
No, I again, when I heard it, it's almost unsettling,
Yeah.
but like in my head, in a perfect way, you
Mhm.
know? It's like it creates so much character that is in such contrast to what happens later in the piece.
Oh, very much.
Like it really is like this journey of this character. And I would never have thought I could have done this with 12 tone music, honestly, you know? Um,
That's why you broke it.
Broke music. It should not have worked. I am 100% convinced. Even, okay, I played this for people that some of them are music people, some of them are not music people at all. Like, they listen to pop music or watch a movie and there's music in there. And I'm like, okay, what do you think of this? And they shouldn't like it. Like,
Right.
honestly, in my head, this is the kind of piece that, oh, you need to have some music theory. You need to have some history of musical movements in Germany and everything else. I play this piece for them and they're like, oh, this is cool. I really like this. That's their reaction. And it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I mean, like most of your music, it does have like that quality of like feeling like it can be in a movie in it, or like it feels like it's really telling a story. And I feel like this isn't an exception. You're just able to do it with 12 tone music, so it just became a little creepier. Kind of reminded me of a Tim Burton film. That's what I used to say. Yeah, it reminded me
Okay.
of
Mm.
a Tim Burton film because it kind of had like a creepy but a kind of fun, beautiful quality to it all at the same time.
Oh, that makes me happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what's interesting to me is I don't try to tell stories. I mean, there's been a few pieces, obviously, that, like the Little Match Girl ballet, that's very much a story. But most of my other pieces are just here's music, but they end up telling a story for whatever reason. And I find that really interesting.
That is strange. Yeah, usually from the composers that I've talked to, they usually come up with a story and then they try to convey it through
Yeah,
music. So
yeah,
you're the opposite.
yeah. And I've heard people talk about absolute music and how they look down on program music and all the rest of it. Um, I don't have any, I mean, I love program music. I think if you're able to take a story and tell that story in music, that's phenomenal. Most of the time I just don't try to do it. It's just what ends up happening, you know?
You're just that good.
I don't want to say that.
Kind of piggybacking on the whole, like people just like it, and we're not really sure why, but we're glad that they do. And that's kind of another reason why I wanted to put it on my recital is I just want more people to know about it, and that also your general concept of let's make 12 tone music listenable. Um, I think that a lot of people, um, especially younger like music majors who are just being introduced to it, um, whereas like the average public might not even know, not even care because they're used to just whatever sound effects in movies and
That's
right.
true.
But like when musicians are first introduced to 12 tone, typically there's an adverse response,
That's a very
right?
tactful way of putting it. Yes.
And I think that this type of composition and what you managed to do with it and how you struggled with it and found something in it to bring out, I think that that's really really cool and something that I wanted to share with more of the world by putting in my recital, and hopefully I'll get a chance to play it or other works of yours later. And I hope that people listen to this podcast or listen to that piece and like, oh, this is cool. I want to have more stuff like this where it's clearly different than, the average piece that you get put on your music stand, but it's still captivating and it's still interesting. And whether you see a specific story in it or not, there's something in there that makes you go, that was creative and that was cool. That was an interesting way to execute that,
Thank you. That is awesome to hear. Do you remember the look on the faces of the musicians the first time you gave them the music? When I came in to work with you guys, a couple of them had said, I've never played music like this before.
Yeah.
Like it just, I don't even know if it fits a description. Like, would you call this tonal or atonal? Is this 12 tone or not 12 tone? Like, I don't know what to call it, but I know they had to kind of work themselves to the point of, oh, okay, I see what this is now. And then they were fine, but it just was different for them.
I agree. I think it's hard to kind of put your finger on, is this tonal or atonal, because it really does blur the boundary between the two. And if you want to talk more about this, we can, but the fact that when I got the score from you and it was unfinished as far as like editing and cleaning up, but it was just the raw notes. And I remember I asked you like, oh, there's this blank piano and timpani part. Did you want those in there? And I'm like, because I remember telling you, like, I really can hear a timpani working really well in some spots in here. And he's like, well, Jeff was like, I originally had envisioned there being a timpani part, and then I just kind of scrapped it and didn't know how to do all the pedal changes with 12 tone. It was going to be too much. I was like, no, I think I can do this. And so I wrote a timpani part and I showed it to him and I played it for him. And he's like, oh, that works. I think they only brought 2 or 3 drums into the recital hall with them. And it was very achievable because like we spread it out. But like those moments where the timpani comes in, it just really adds that nice bass to it. And there was even a cool part. Well, right around 41, we were talking about with like the randomish flute notes and the kind of ostinato going on in the bassoons and clarinets. That part, the timpani just adds, I think, so much to it. And I think the fact that the timpani was able to slot in so many cases, was just like a D and an A was a lot of it. And there's an F sharp and a B flat and an E flat in there sometimes, but for the most part, it's like D, A, and then the C at the end. And like, it's very close to tonal a lot of the time.
I love that description. So close to tonal.
I really think it is because there's sometimes when it might be extended tonalities, but it's clearly there's something where there's a home base around D or around C or around whatever, and that seeing that in the string bass on the E flats and the Ds and then the A and then kind of mimicking that in the timpani part, it was too convenient to be completely atonal. We know this. It's not completely atonal.
And I remember when you came to me and asked me about the timpani part, and as I had said, I had thought about it, and by that point, I'd been dealing with a 20 by 20 Rubik's cube in my head, and adding in timpani. Do you remember the old Star Trek show where they used to play chess on like 5 different levels?
Were there 5? I remember there being 3.
3, okay, 3.
I don't know.
Multiple level chess, right? That's what this turned into in my head. As soon as you said put a timpani in there, 3 levels now, and all I can think is I don't know if my brain can go there right now. So when you came to me with the part, and then I heard it, it was like, wow, like this just fits so well, And I wouldn't have thought it would have been that smooth or that easy. I thought they'd be head over the timpani trying to retune like every second measure, So I was super impressed with that. That worked out so well.
It was one of those things, like I'm definitely not a composer, but for some reason in that particular moment in that piece, it just had to be that way in my mind.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, I don't know where I got that inspiration from, but the piece did itself so well.
Yeah.
Also, I'm curious, is this piece available now? Is the score available now? I didn't
No,
think so.
no.
Jeff, why isn't it available?
Okay, this is a whole other conversation. Part of it is I haven't gotten to it yet. That's a lesser part of it. The bigger part of it is um, I'm finding it almost impossible to get organizations to look at anything new. Whether it's choral or orchestra or band or anything. Um, my vocal stuff right now is being looked at. It's being included in the RCM syllabus, and I'm very happy about that. Anything outside of that, it's like I don't exist or nobody's interested for whatever reason. So part of it in my head is, do I want to put that much work into it? Because I still have to, do the editing and, all the nice phrasing and dynamics and everything else. Do I want to do that and just be frustrated because it doesn't go anywhere? Like if Jim hadn't performed this piece, the last orchestral piece would have been in 2017. And then Windsor Symphony before that, which we've already talked about. Like it's really few and far between, you know?
Yeah, this definitely is a bigger conversation, and being I'm a student at U of T now, and I'm part of the contemporary ensemble, and just overall the school environment, I feel like they want to celebrate new composers, but only composers that are really into the contemporary.
Yeah,
Like nothing, like it's very atonal
yeah.
what I'm currently playing. That seems to be what they're interested in. And for orchestra, they seem to be afraid of it, and it seems like both of them are just kind of afraid, and like you're in the middle,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
From my
absolutely.
experience working in K-12 education and a little bit in universities too, similar story to what Katie's saying. Like, I think the universities, yeah, they'll play like the big name composers, or obviously they'll feature their own student at times. Um, but other than that, I think for the most part, at least in education, from my experience, and I'm sure other people may have differing experiences, but from my perspective, as an ensemble director slash teacher, people know composers' names, like current contemporary living composers' names, as, oh, they're a band composer, they're an orchestra composer,
Yeah,
they're a, and like you might get known in one of those, but like you have to have a huge library for that particular ensemble type, and it has to be like a standard ensemble that the kids can do from grade 6 to university or whatever. And if you only have pieces at a certain level, or for if you're too spread thin across different types of ensembles and different genres and styles of music, it's really hard to get known.
it's almost
Uh,
like you're not allowed to be competent in different areas,
right.
right? Like it's almost like you have to be pigeonholed in one area now.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's how I feel about it.
yeah,
Exactly.
I think you're right.
And it's similar for like conducting. Like we get pigeonholed into, you're a band conductor, you're an
Yeah,
orchestra conductor,
yeah.
which I personally disagree with. Like I understand professionally the reasons for that, but I don't think that we should force our students to be one or the other when, so many of the jobs out there, if you're teaching below university, there's a good chance you're going to have to do both, depending on where geographically you are.
That's a good
Um,
point.
and so I think that there's a lot to be said in the positives for like specialization, but I think in some places it's gone a bit far. Personally, that's just my opinion. And similar story for the composition. Like, it just makes it hard because, like, I remember. Okay, here's a name that you'll probably recognize, but most of my American friends wouldn't. Is Ryan Meeboer. I might
Okay.
be mispronouncing that. Are you familiar with his works?
I've heard the name. Yeah.
Okay, so he's a Canadian composer, and I was browsing around trying to find something, anything different to play with my band 2, 3 years ago after COVID. Like we're like we got past grade 1, we're like in grade 2 and 2.5 music again, but not quite to where we were pre-COVID. I was looking for just anything different to play at festival that like the judges haven't heard this one a billion times over. And I came across his works, and I bought one of them, and the adjudicators just went crazy. They were like, "This is such a cool piece. Where'd you find out about this guy?" I'm like, "I don't know. I just was doing research and had to dig into the depths of the internet to realize that okay, he has some good stuff." But then I get up to Ontario and studying at Western, and it feels like just about everybody's heard of him, and most of the undergrads who are band students have played his works.
Yeah.
But and this is again, I could be wrong. I haven't like really dug into him. So Ryan, Igor, if you're listening to this, I apologize if I'm wrong. But I feel like most of his works are for like school band,
Yeah.
right? And I like barely like discovered, I guess you could say, him from across the border. But no one in California that I could find had ever heard that name before. And then I get up there and I'm working with the undergrads in their music ed and conducting classes, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I played his pieces all the time because he's Canadian." I'm like, "Okay, that's cool." Um, but
Well,
it's like you get known in your little bubble,
yeah.
and it's really hard to break out of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And unless the directors, the conductors, the ensemble leaders are actively looking for something different, which is hard to do in this climate, like financially, educationally, all the
Yeah.
political things, whatever, like for whatever combination of reasons, it's just really hard to like break through that barrier. I could see why that would be
Well,
challenging.
I think you made an interesting point there too, because you talked about most of his pieces seem to be in the lower end educational realm, like grade level educational realm, right? And it's almost like, well, if you're known for educational music, you're not known for concert music. And yeah, big quotes, big quotes. And if you write concert music, well, you're never going to find your way into the schools. And music that's performed in the schools, for some reason, hardly ever gets out into the concert world, no matter what form it's in.
Unless you're one of like the classics.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Right. But like if you're not like cemented into the hallmarks of the literature, then yeah, good luck.
Yeah. Perfect. This is a perfect story for this, actually. Talking about the classics and everything else. I don't know if either of you know much about the Iceland Symphony Orchestra. Okay. You should do some history, like just read up on them and listen to them. They are amazing, honestly, in the quality of their performances, but also in their history. So just over 100 years ago, they had never even heard or performed four-part choral music because they're so isolated, and their background is like Viking kind of legends and all that kind of stuff. So it was, here's a harp, here's a whatever, and one voice. And that was the music they knew. So there was a traveling choir, like doing tours, and they went to Iceland. They sang four-part harmony, blew their minds. And they immediately like, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And then there was a traveling orchestra from someplace in Europe who went to Iceland in the early 1900s, played whatever. And again, another huge musical evolution in Iceland because we didn't know this existed. We want to do this. And within decades, they had a world-class orchestra going nonstop. And they put on dozens of concerts a year. And like Iceland's population is less than the city of London, Ontario.
I was going to say, yeah.
Right? Like
That's crazy.
The entire country, their population is less than the city of London, Ontario, yet they have this world-class organization and they're doing amazing things, right? So I found out about them, super impressed with what they do, chorally and orchestrally. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to reach out. I'm going to get in touch because I do this about once a year where I have like 5 minutes of let's try, you know? And so I reached out to them within that 5 minutes and I just asked, are you an organization that's interested in new music? And introduced myself and the whole bit. Surprised that I got an answer back from them because most organizations don't answer. They were kind enough to answer. Their response was, yes, we're very interested in new music. However, we tend to focus on Icelandic composers, which why wouldn't they? And also, the big names current in the world. the contemporary composers that have made a mark, they're looking at them plus Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, that kind of stuff. And then they ended the email with, but we're sure there would be Canadian orchestras that would be interested in your music. And I looked at that and I didn't respond, but all I could think is, I think I just died again a little bit inside because no, it just doesn't seem to be the way that we do things in Canada. I can't speak about other countries, but we don't seem to really want or be able to promote our not only our well-known artists and composers, but any who are doing things unless it's the most out there. And then, hey, look, we're going to show that we're artists because we're going to do the most out there stuff, you know?
Right.
Yeah. This actually is really interesting because we come from three different areas of music: composition, performance, and conducting. And it feels like
Class education. Yeah.
yes, music education and conducting. And it seems like every aspect of it, from what I've heard from others and what we're talking about now, like you just get put in a box and you can't do much else. Like I was considering doing like a research project about something, and they were like, "You're in performance. Why do you want to do that?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And
Yeah, I know that feeling.
this is just like a problem for like everyone.
Mhm.
It just sucks. I wonder how we can help fix that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's also this pattern, just to add on to what you're saying, Katie, because I completely agree. Of once you get kind of shoved into that box of whatever label that people decide they want to put on you, um, I find that there are, and apologize for my pessimism here, but just a moment of it. I feel like there's a staggering number of people who are, let's say, a performer, like they're labeled as a performer and they can just kind of do whatever and it's a big deal, even if it's not like their best work. Same thing for like researchers. Like there's people putting out research that's just kind of like, really, that's all that you had to say for this whole paper or this whole article? But like, because they're a big name,
Yeah.
that still makes the money and makes things go around. When on the flip side, people like you, Katie, who are, you're known as a performer, that means like you couldn't get published if you wanted to, like
Yeah.
it's an extremely tough, it's a steep curve to like get over that initial hurdle, um, to like cross pollinate or like be interdisciplinary in any sort of way. And it's kind of unfortunate. I agree.
hmm I do think, like, I am hopeful in the way that, like, there are people that are coming up from my generation that I feel like will try and make this better. I do feel, though, that, like, the generations before us, they seem to kind of put this in place. And
Right.
I'm
It's
hopeful.
been going on for centuries. Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah. And I do think it is headed in a positive direction.
Hmm.
Just like being in school, I've been able to make connections with people who want to be in conducting and music education, and I feel like those people are going to make better change. I obviously can't do that for everything, but for performance, I'm going to try and implement that. They're going to try and implement that. So I do hope it gets better. And yes, you're definitely known as a choral person because I've heard a lot about you for your choral works.
See, okay. I'm take one step back on this one. I know you've said that to me before, and I know you were shocked when I told you that I have more instrumental works than choral pieces.
Yes.
Like that, you couldn't believe that at first when I told you that.
Yeah.
I think part of it was because at one point, at least, it was easier to get a choir to look at your music and perform it than it was to find instrumentalists to look at your music and perform it. So if you, plus, I mean, choral pieces tend to be shorter,
That's what I
right?
was
So they're
thinking.
easier to approach, easier to tackle in rehearsal. Whereas if you're doing a
And they
symphony,
tend to do more of them in a given concert cycle
right, right. So there's
as
a
a
greater
result.
chance that somebody will be willing to take the time on your piece and put you in their concert list, which is again, you're always super thankful for that, But as you just said, you become known for, oh, you're a choral composer because we've heard several of your choral pieces. And it's like, well, I do write choral music. You know, Brahms wrote choral music. Do you think of Brahms as a choral composer?
No.
Probably no, right? Not that I'm comparing myself to Brahms in any way, by the way, I'm just throwing that out there. But it's just it seems to be again going back to that. Here's your box, here's your pigeonhole. You live in there, and somehow there's got to be a way to have other exits to that box, so you can throw other boxes together and build a condo or something. You know, like I don't know what that is, but I think it's got to be possible. You know,
And I'm obviously not going to be able to do this single-handedly, but I've also tried really hard as a student to spread your music because I'm hoping that when they leave school and they become professionals that maybe they're going to help improve things with the instrumental thing. I'm afraid for orchestras because they just don't seem to have the same attitude to celebrate Canadian composers that way, or they're scared. I don't know.
okay,
Combination.
that's
I,
fair. I mean,
I also think that like North America, to generalize for both countries here, we inherited the orchestral traditions from Europe. I think stronger than the other types of large ensembles that we're talking about. Like band movement, sure, kind of European, but like that
yeah,
significantly parts of that evolution happened in North America,
yeah,
right? Choir, also, I think that that was a European thing, of course, but we kind of have our own ways to do it. And as you were saying, the length of the pieces, the quantity of the pieces is totally different ball game
yeah.
compared to the instrumental groups. But with orchestra, back to that point, I think that for whatever combination of reasons, most orchestras have gotten mostly stuck in like 1900s,
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
right?
can I offer a comment on that?
Sure, of course.
I think it's because we have a dichotomy going on. We have conductor, musician, audience, and most conductor musicians understand that audience generally is more familiar with 18th, 19th century music, and they're more likely to enjoy it at first hearing,
Hmm.
as opposed to contemporary music, where it may, I mean, contemporary music, the term scares people, and it shouldn't. I mean, for a while, I understood why it would. It doesn't, contemporary just means stuff being written now. That's all it means, right? Um, but there have been cases where contemporary music just drives audiences away. There's
Right.
also contemporary music that's amazing, you know, and I mean, best example for me is when people or organizations put on concerts of film music,
I was just thinking that, yeah.
right? Film music, by and large, is like it's every contemporary technique you would ever want, but within a film context. And people, for some reason in their mind, go, I can accept it that way, and
Hmm.
they enjoy it, you know? So it's such a weird balancing act, I think, you know? I don't know.
Oh, for
One
sure.
thing I was going to say is I feel like you have written for ensembles and everything that aren't necessarily traditional, but I feel like there is also a lot of opportunity for to write things that don't seem to have anything, like for example, flute sonatas. Okay, but I am joking. But in a way, like flute sonatas, when we try and pick one that's Canadian, there's one that comes to mind, and it's the Glick Sonata. There's not really anything else.
Yeah.
And then if I'm thinking for like there's like a specific part of the syllabus that has like nothing for the RCM, and she was like suggesting you write for that, and that also like I feel like there are some spaces that are just completely empty right now that might also be something to explore once you get your
Yeah.
creativity going again.
Yeah, possibly. Um, Again, the
Trying
danger sometimes is, okay, I filled a gap.
Fill
Is
the
that what
gap.
I'm known for now?
Right. I want to go back to what Jeff was saying a minute ago too. Like how like people will show up and get excited about film music, but not other contemporary music just because it's contemporary. But I think that the way that a lot of organizations I've seen do like the pre-concert lectures and things, I think that's a great idea in concept. The question is just like, how's that being presented, and are people showing up to that, right? But case in point, I think it was about 4 years ago now, maybe a little more. I programmed. I was conducting a district honor band, and I programmed David Maslanka work, Mother Earth Fanfare, which is very short but very dissonant,
Mhm.
and has a little bit of extended techniques and like weird things going on there with the rhythms and harmonies, and like it's what you would expect. But it's one of those pieces that on first listen, if you're not a complete nerd of a musician, you're probably not going to like it. And I knew that going in, and I programmed it as the opener because it's a fanfare. And fortunately, we had a captive audience because it's their kids, but also because the middle school district honor band went right before us. So like people were already there. But I just did like a 2 minute like pre-concert talk about what they were about to hear, why it was important, what was the motivation behind the piece, what to expect to listen for and to like follow, and so many people came up to me afterwards and said that that was their favorite piece, and I could just tell like they were kind of scared at first, but they were floored, like they were like trying to give a standing ovation for the first piece. That was like a 2 minute fanfare.
Wow.
And then similarly, I had several people come up to me after my recital this last semester and say that your piece was their favorite because you came up and did that awesome talk,
Really?
right? And like it was cool because they understood what the piece was about and why it was the way that it was.
Yeah.
And I think that even for a non-musically trained listener, if they just have a little bit of a hook,
Yeah.
and they have a purpose for listening to it, and it's not just like wall of sound coming at them that just seems random and incoherent, right? But if there's like some story to it or some rationale behind the why it sounds the way it does, then they're going to really invest in it. And I'm curious, like, are there ways that the conductors, the directors, the whatever whoever's performing this type of music can help to engage the audience more so that it can become, and I'm not saying that all of it's amazing, but this piece
Yeah.
is right. But if you want to program something like that, that's a good thing. We should be celebrating our contemporary living composers alongside the great masters, and like there shouldn't be this like, oh, we only play XYZ, right? Um, but I think that that needs to be done with the audience in mind, so that you get those subscribing, paying ticket people like back in the door, right?
Which is what
Um,
we all want. Yeah. Yeah.
so obviously that looks different whether you're talking about a professional symphony or a community choir or a school band or whatever. But the point is, you want the performers to appreciate the music, you want the audience to listen to appreciate the music, and we want to not be stuck in our little pigeonhole of composing for or listening to or programming the same thing every time.
Right. Here, okay, while you were talking, I had another thought too of going back to Ins Licht for a second. You said you enjoyed the piece. I'm assuming you would, if somebody asked you, you would say this should be performed.
I mean, depending on the group, if they, yeah, I
I'm
probably
talking
wouldn't go play
generalities
with the
here.
middle school band.
Generalities, right?
Okay, yes.
So yes, you think it's worthy of being performed by
Yeah,
proper level groups,
yes.
right? Okay. Word of mouth, I think, goes a long, long way. And Katie, I appreciate you spreading the word. That's cool.
It is
But
awesome.
the other part of that is the willingness of the person who's hearing it to do some research.
Mhm.
And like you said with the band piece, a lot of the people in the States, or most of them, had never heard of this piece before.
Yeah.
You did the research. I think a lot of times either people don't have the inclination, the ability, or the time to put into researching certain things And the established ones that they know already, they know. They don't have to put the research into it. So that again puts onus on how do we create an awareness? And I know there are organizations that are there to promote Canadian music or American music or whatever kind of music, Irish music. They're actually really big at it. But if they're not thinking, how else do we do this other than we're here, come find us, it's not going to be effective, right?
Right.
So that's another question.
And again, speaking about like from experience, most like public school music teachers just don't have that kind of time to be looking for things because they're stretched way too thin already dealing with the politics of the school environment and teaching however many kids, however many different things they have to teach during the course of the week, and like they're gonna naturally fall back on what they have done before and what they know, and it's really hard to break out of that. And so I think a lot of this has to be done at the university level before they get in, before the teachers go out there, so that they can pass it on to the next generation. But it's going to be a slow burn, and like that's why, like Katie was mentioning earlier, and like your generation, because we all come from different generations, which is kind of cool. But I think my generation has started to in some ways, but not everybody, But I think that definitely that the younger generations that are in undergrad, in masters, or starting to teach around now, they have a unique perspective and advantage in trying to make some of these changes a reality. But it's still going to take a lot of people working towards the same goal and a lot of time, and it's not going to be something that I think any of our generations are going to see, very much results, in the next couple decades. It's going to take some time.
Yeah.
Sadly.
I can argue that.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
In Ins Licht, what is your favorite part of the piece?
That's,
I know that's an impossible question. I know.
Yeah. Listening to it, and I listened to it again last night, where you get that little ostinato in the bass stuff going on, and that's where the string chords are just kind of hovering around there.
39, 41, yeah.
Yeah, and I love that. There's also a section later on where there's just a series of chords that just fade out to one held note, and then it comes again, and then the horn holds a note, and then you just have a trio of instruments kind of go off on their own for a little minute, and it again shouldn't work, and harmonically it's different.
Oh, we're 63, and the viola's at 64, and the French horn at 66. Yeah. I see what you're talking about.
Right, and there's just that series of chords that's just warm and just kind of hovers and meanders for a minute, and it's like, oh, I love that for whatever reason. But then I think the way it ends with, it comes back to a gesture that you hear the first 2 minutes with these triumphant horn. I don't even, it's not even a melody, but whatever the horns are doing there, and the chords are building, and the horns don't fit what the chords are doing until the very, very end. And then it's just like the sun came out and it just gets brighter and brighter and brighter. Every time I hear it, it's like, how much bigger can it get? But I love it, So I think those 3 sections for me are probably, they do it for me every time.
Yeah.
Nice. If we had performed this piece in Paul Davenport Theater, there was like something that the wind ensemble would always do where they'd try and make the lights flicker, because they would.
I remember that.
Loud enough, it would be really fun to see if we can make the lights flicker, because that last chord is so epic.
Yeah.
So powerful, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been fun.
From this piece, I can tell you really like the horn also.
And this horns and trombones, out of all the brass instruments, those are my favorite. Just there's a power and a warmth at the same time, and the amount of things you can do with those 2 instruments as opposed to a tuba or a trumpet, for example, just fit my wheelhouse of my personal tastes, right?
Jeff, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody, Jim's a bit biased. Jim, tell them what instrument you play.
I play trombone and French horn.
Well, look at the instruments behind him. Come on, look at. Um, so
In
so
case it wasn't obvious.
for me, those are the instruments. And when I started actually orchestrating this, it was like, okay, that's where it's going. I know this automatically. So every time I would go someplace, it would always pull back to those moments of big horn, big trombone, you know?
The horn is like I think the most iconic part of this piece. The horn is just so good throughout all of it. The parts
It
are
really
amazing.
is.
The flute's pretty good too, but I'm just there to do the bop, bop. Which would sound like it kind of sounds like we're almost improvising that part, which I love. We're like,
Yeah,
"Bop," except you have two flutes on it, so if one,
just
it's
an octave.
And you know
yeah.
what? That part actually worried me a little bit because it's like when I heard that not everybody had been able to be at rehearsals at the same time, all I could think is, oh, are they going to be able to do this in unison?
The counting isn't super hard, but it's not very intuitive. You have to really
Yeah.
be. So we practiced it a few times, and yeah, the first time we did it, we were like da 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 da, and we're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Honestly, I think that description is probably why I like it so much because it's not intuitive. It isn't something you just expect. Whereas the rest of the piece, I think, flows naturally and goes where you think it should, even if you're not expecting it. And then when we get to that section and all of a sudden the flutes are just doing that, you're like, what is going on? You
Yeah.
know, I just think they offset each other so well there.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I remember my first time playing this, and I was the only flute player there, and I got to that part and I played it, and I was like, was was that correct? And then I kept doing it, and Jim was like, but it creates such a cool effect. That's I'm biased because I like that part a lot because I get to play it, but I think that's my favorite part personally.
Okay.
Jim,
Okay,
what's
Jim.
your favorite part?
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I think where I put that timpani stuff around measure 39, where the basses are just droning on E flat at the bottom, but the timpani just gives a little bit of rhythm to push it over each bar line. That's one of my favorite spots. And you keep mentioning like the bass voices with the bassoon and the ostinato and things, and that's actually right where that crazy flute part comes. Crazy, the flute part
Yeah.
comes in with
Yeah.
the random sounding rhythms. Um, but I like to me I like obviously if I'm conducting it, yeah, I'm like, okay, make sure I'm with the flute so that we're being steady and even. But in my head, I'm just like glued to the ostinato and the timpani. Dum, right? And
Yeah.
like that is just like creeping ever so slowly forward. And it's
Yeah.
such a cool motion, like, because it's so slow,
Yeah.
but it feels like it's just pressing forward and adding to the tension. It's almost like that whole section is like a harmonic or like tension wise, it's like a crescendo, but not getting louder. Because if anything, it gets softer at the end.
Yeah.
But
But
it's just building that whole time. It has the rhythm in the flutes contrasting with the ostinato and the bassoons and the rhythm in the timpani and then the chords in the upper strings. And it's just like, what's going on? And it just builds so much cool suspense instead of horns, dee-dom, right? So that's definitely one of my favorite spots. And then the other one, I want to say it's either 53 or I think it was 53. Hmm. Anyway, there's one point when like the lower strings, I think it is, because it's yeah, bassoons, viola, cello, just have this all of a sudden it's very consonant out of nowhere. Like there was all this weird dissonance happening before that, and then this part is just super consonant. I'm just like, it's just so lush the way that you orchestrated it, and it's like this nice break from the dissonance and the tension, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, we can relax for a little bit.
it does it
Uh,
sound like it naturally got there?
oh yeah,
Okay.
it just flows perfectly into that, and I don't know how you did it, but it was really cool.
Jeff, what was it like hearing this piece? Was it what you expected?
Yeah. Do you mean live or just on my computer?
Live.
Live.
In
Okay.
recital.
Um, it was awesome. And when you said the dress rehearsal was better, like that I can't imagine what that would have sounded like, because what I heard was amazing to me. You know, like everything we've all said to each other, you know, computers are great and you can do great things with computers, but computers will lie to you without even thinking. They'll lie. You know, they'll tell you whatever you want. And, you know, I got used to hearing it on my computer and it's like, yep, this is what I expect. And then to hear, like, everything live is always that one step better, no matter what. You know, you get the better interaction between the instruments and you get just lines that come out you're not expecting and all of that kind of stuff. And hearing that live was, I just sat there and was like, wow, this was, if anything, better than what I had hoped. I have to say, and this is a compliment, by the way, um, almost every performance, especially the larger the ensemble, there's always at least one moment when you just like, oh, well, okay, that was horribly wrong. And now that's all I'm going to remember about this piece.
Oh,
Somebody, you know, either somebody missed an entry or something, you know, it just, there's always a moment like that where I'm hypersensitive to it. Nobody else is going to notice, but it's
right.
because it's my piece, it's in my head, right? This, I didn't have a moment like that. This, I just sat there and I'm just anticipating the next thing. And then the next thing would happen. It was like, oh, that was, yeah, I like that. And then anticipate the next thing. It was like, oh yeah, this was perfect. You know, I was just
Well, thank you.
so happy.
Yay, that's so good.
Yeah. We said a lot.
We
We
have.
have said a lot.
This has been a yapping hour.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Jim. That was really fun talking about all that stuff.
Yeah, this has been great.
It has been.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us for Small Talk episode 2 with special guest Jim Winchell. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Do the
Thanks,
outro.
goodbye.
Do the outro.
There's an outro.